Hello, friends. Welcome to day 3 of our study. And I want to start with a question for you. And this is the question: who do you believe Jesus is? And how you answer that matters because it directly impacts your discipleship to Jesus and the degree to which you will listen and follow him. In Jesus' day in Matthew 16, he's asking his first followers, who do the people say the Son of Man is? Who do they say I am? And they had some answers that were kind of floating around in the day. And then in Matthew 16, Jesus asked them very directly this powerful question. He says, but what about you? Who do you say I am? And Simon Peter answered, well, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And so Peter gets the answer right. God's working in his story, helping him understand who Jesus is. And then Jesus begins to explain to them the plan of what's going to happen and how he's going to go to Jerusalem and he's going to be arrested and things aren't going to go well. He'll be handed over and he's going to die and then rise from the dead. And now Peter is wrestling with this because it doesn't make sense to who he thinks Jesus is. And so we see right after this moment, Peter took him aside and rebukes him. He rebukes Jesus. And he goes, never, Lord, this shall never happen to you. And Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. And it's amazing how Peter goes in one moment from blessed are you, Simon, to get behind me. You have worldly things in mind. And isn't it amazing how we can get so close in our following of Jesus and yet at times still totally miss it? And so I think there's a danger we have to be mindful of when it comes to being disciples of Jesus as we follow him and chase after him in this world. And it's that we might have an inaccurate view of who he is. Now, sometimes that happens because we're in process and we're growing and we're discovering him as we're continuing to lean in and chase after him. But sometimes that happens because we choose our preferred version of Jesus. So sometimes we love Jesus as a consultant in our life, and we'll go to him to get good tips, and maybe we got some questions, and hey, can you help me in this area? Sometimes we go to Jesus because we treat him like a paramedic. So life's falling apart, and we're suddenly calling 911, and we're diving deep into church, and then when it's going well, we kind of like peace out. And those things are true of Jesus. Like, yes, of course, as creator, he knows what he's talking about. And as savior, he can help us. But Jesus is so much more than just those things. Paul writes in Colossians that God has done something incredible for us. He's rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So there's implications to that about who Jesus is. If we've been brought into a kingdom, well, that means there's a king. And if we're invited into life with Jesus, then we're stepping into his kingdom and we're coming under his authority in our life and his rulership in us. And that's not a democracy. We don't get to debate with him about his policies or the things that he's up to in our life and in our story. We're stepping into life with him so we can be transformed and changed. And Jesus invites us into new life with him, not so we can shake his hand and say thank you and then go our own way. Jesus invites us to follow him to rescue us from having gone our own way. And so when Jesus calls us to follow him into new life, it's so he can do a new work in us and set us free. Jesus says in John 10 that he came that we may have life and have it to the full. And the way we experience that life is by listening and following and going where he goes and becoming like him as he does his work in us. Jesus says in John 8 that if we're going to be his disciples, we're going to hold to his teaching. And if we hold to his teaching, we will know the truth, and that truth will set us free. And so we hold to his teaching, we listen and follow, not simply because we think it's good advice or we need help. We hold to his teaching because he's king. And as king, his words have authority and weight, and they're leading us into the hope of something new. And so as we learn to trust him, as we listen and follow, as we chase him into this life that he has for us, it's not so we can continue going our own way, because going our own way is not the path to freedom. That's the path into death and brokenness and loss. It's going his way because he is the way, the truth, and the life. And he's inviting us into something new with him. And so here's a simple question to wrestle with as we think about who Jesus is. Are you living in his kingdom, or are you still living in your own? And one of the ways we can wrestle with that in our story and figuring that out is a simple question we can ask. Does Jesus have permission to challenge you? Does Jesus have permission to lead you in life? And when he does challenge you, how do you respond? Do you come under his authority because you believe he's good and he knows what he's talking about and he wants to do something in your life? Or do you continue going your own way? And see, that's the danger of discipleship, when we don't let Jesus be all of who he is and respond to him as king and come under his authority. So often we want him to change our lives without allowing him to challenge our lives. But it's responding to the challenge that leads us into freedom and experiencing what he wants to give us, because Jesus is king. And so as we gather at Encounter this week, let's come with that mindset that we're coming together as his people, coming under his authority as our king, and we're coming together to worship our king in the hopes that we can experience more of the life he has for us, because he has more for us as we learn to listen and follow, because Jesus is Lord.